Imagine returning to the place where everything began, only to find that the past you tried to bury is standing right there, staring back at you, with 3 children who look exactly like you. That's exactly what happened to Alexander Reed, a millionaire used to controlling the world yet powerless when it came to love. He lost the only woman who ever truly mattered because of prejudice. But fate brought him back to his ranch where he came face to face with Naomi Carter, his ex-wife, and former maid, only this time she wasn't alone. And what he discovered would change everything. This is a story about love, forgiveness, and courage, but also about the price of truth and the power of faith. A gripping drama full of twists that will make you rethink what truly matters in life. So before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now get ready, because what you're about to hear will touch your heart like few stories ever do. When Alexander Reed stepped once more onto the dry Texas soil, the wind seemed to carry the weight of all the years he had tried to forget. The ranch, now filled with new faces and unfamiliar smiles, was no longer the same home that had once been a stage for love and pain. The millionaire, dressed impeccably and with a distant gaze, believed he was ready to face the past. But the heart, oh, the heart never lies. He had returned seeking order but found only memories. Deep down he knew the real disorder wasn't in the ranch but inside him. It's curious how time changes people, yet the ground of memory stays the same. Alexander walked through the halls that once echoed with simple laughter and the smell of fresh coffee. He was the kind of man who had everything: power, fortune, respect, and yet lived as if carrying a hollow in his chest. They say success without peace is just a refined kind of loneliness, and he was the living portrait of that. A millionaire surrounded by gold but with a silent soul. That late afternoon, the sound of a bucket hitting the floor pulled him from his thoughts. When he turned, he saw something time could never have prepared him for: a woman kneeling, cleaning the floor with firm, silent movements. It was Naomi Carter, the woman he had sworn never to see again. The former maid who once upon a time had swept away more than dust. She had taken his heart. And there she was again, with the same serene posture, but with eyes that told of 1,000 silent battles won. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with everything left unsaid. Naomi stood up slowly, holding the cloth like someone holding an invisible shield. Alexander tried to say her name, but his voice refused to come out. Strange, isn't it? The same man who commanded empires with a single word now couldn't speak the name of the woman who had split his world in 2. Sometimes power means nothing when faced with the truth of a feeling. Then the impossible happened. 3 small voices echoed through the hall, laughing, stumbling, calling out, "Mommy." 3 little figures ran toward Naomi, wrapping their arms around her legs with the innocence of those who still believe love is safe. Alexander stood there, stunned. His heart, once made of stone, melted in seconds. There was something familiar in those eyes, something that made the ground vanish beneath his feet, as if the past had returned to demand payment. The old ranch, once a backdrop for business and prized horses, had turned into a stage for revelation. While Naomi tried to avoid the millionaire's gaze, the children laughed, blissfully unaware of the tension. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor. It insists on bringing people face to face right when they most wish to hide. Alexander realized then that no matter how far one runs, time always finds a way to settle the debts of the heart. Some say the universe speaks through coincidences, and that's exactly what Alexander felt in that moment. He who once believed he owned everything now stood before the only thing money could never buy: the past. Naomi, the maid he had loved, seemed to have blossomed despite the scars he'd helped leave behind. And the 3 children, with eyes mirroring his own, were living proof that love may be forgotten, but never erased. Naomi, her heart racing, wiped the sweat from her hands, trying to stay composed. Working again on her ex-husband's ranch, the millionaire's domain, was life's way of testing her strength. But for her, work had always been more than a means of survival. It was her way of living with dignity, and in that moment she felt that the maid she once was had died. But the woman now standing before Alexander was ready to rewrite her story. Alexander remained there, silent, as if trying to decode an enigma fate had sketched in haste. He didn't know whether he felt anger, guilt, or longing. perhaps all of them tied together in a knot too tight to untangle. The millionaire who had conquered the world now found himself small before a truth no contract could contain. And as the sun sank behind the Texan horizon, something within him stirred, something he couldn't yet name. The rumor began as a whisper among the old walls of the house, spreading faster than the Texas wind. "The boss's ex-wife is back," the employees murmured, exchanging curious glances and discreet gestures. Naomi, now with her head held high, tried to remain invisible among the voices that silently cut through her. Her name echoed once again through the hallways like a memory time couldn't erase. And even unwillingly, she became once more the center of a story that had always been hers. Alexander heard the murmurs from afar, pretending not to care. Yet every word about Naomi was like a shattered mirror, reflecting fragments of a past he had sworn to bury. Curiosity gnawed at him. What was she doing there, cleaning the very rooms that once belonged to her? The millionaire, so used to controlling everything, now found himself powerless before a mystery that seemed determined to reveal him to himself. Naomi, the former maid who had once been his wife, tried to keep calm. The cold floor beneath her feet was the same as before, but the weight on her shoulders was not. She didn't fear the work, and she feared the memories. And as she scrubbed the shining marble, she saw in its reflection the face of a woman who had loved, lost, and survived. It was as if the past was hiding in every corner of that house, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Some of the newer workers didn't know the story. They only saw a humble, efficient woman who worked with quiet dignity and avoided trouble. But the older ones remembered. They remembered the forbidden love between the millionaire boss and the maid. They remembered the stolen glances, the whispers that spread all the way to the next town, and the separation that left deep scars. Now, with Naomi's return, it was as if the ranch breathed the same tense air it once had years ago. Alexander couldn't get her image out of his mind. The way she cleaned the floor with calm and precise movements reminded him of a time when things were simpler, but now everything felt heavier and far more dangerous. He could see that every gesture of hers carried both strength and pain, and that unsettled him. She was no longer the woman he once knew. There was a new firmness in Naomi, as if she had learned how to live without needing anyone. That night, alone in his office, Alexander stared at his computer screen without really seeing it. The children's laughter still echoed in his mind, mixed with Naomi's serene gaze. The millionaire tried to convince himself that it was all just coincidence, but his instinct said otherwise. When something feels too precise to be random, it's usually fate in disguise, and he was beginning to sense that fate was about to demand a high price. Meanwhile, Naomi became the target of stares and whispers. Some admired her in silence. Others judged her cruelly, but she stood firm, like a tree that had faced too many storms to bend with the wind. Working there again was like walking on embers. Every step required courage and control. Even so, she remained dignified, determined not to let the past define her. But the past rarely asks permission to return. Driven by doubt, Alexander ordered one of his most trusted men to investigate Naomi. He wanted answers, even though part of him feared what he might find. The millionaire, so used to unraveling financial mysteries, was now delving into the most human mystery of all, a love that refuses to die, even when buried. Days later, the report arrived. Alexander opened it with trembling hands, reading each line as if the words themselves were blades slicing through time. The facts were clear, direct, undeniable. Naomi Carter, the woman he had once loved and lost, was the mother of 3 children born shortly after his departure. Triplets. And for the first time in many years, the man who thought himself unshakable felt his heart collapse inside his chest, unaware that this was only the beginning of the truth. Alexander Reed spent the night awake, the report still in his hands. The words danced before his tired eyes. Naomi Carter, mother of triplets, born 5 years ago. 5 years. The exact amount of time he had been gone. The millionaire closed the file slowly, feeling the weight of a truth he had never asked to find. The silence in his office was louder than any storm. He knew he had to face what he had always avoided, the possibility of being a father. Dawn arrived with a soft mist over the ranch, and Alexander stepped outside with hesitant strides. The smell of wet earth mixed with the cold breeze, reminding him of the days when Naomi smiled among the flowers. When he saw the children playing near the barn, his heart skipped. 3 small reflections of himself, their hair, their eyes, their expressions, all betrayed the blood running through them. The millionaire felt the ground shift beneath his feet, as if time itself had come to collect its debt. The children ran freely, laughing with the lightness of those who know nothing of adult burdens. Naomi watched from a distance, cleaning an old window, a rag in her hand and her gaze lost somewhere far away. She knew this moment would come. There was no hiding the obvious. Every feature of the triplets was a living reminder of the love and pain she carried. Yet she preferred silence over humiliation. Being a maid again was easier than being judged for having loved the wrong man. One of the boys, Ethan, tripped and fell, scraping his knee. Alexander, by pure instinct, ran to him before Naomi even noticed. He lifted the child into his arms with the care of someone holding his own heart. Naomi froze for a few seconds, stunned. That scene, the millionaire kneeling, comforting a child, seemed too impossible to be real. And for a fleeting moment, she saw the man she once loved, not the distant master the world had turned him into. Ethan, still sobbing, looked up at Alexander with the same blue-gray eyes as his father. A curious, almost familiar gaze. Alexander swallowed hard, realizing what fate had placed before him. He didn't need scientific proof, eyes don't lie. Even so, fear drove him to reason. That very day, he took the boy to a private clinic in the city, under the pretense of wanting to help, but deep down, he was searching for the confirmation his heart already knew. In the clinic, the sterile white walls clashed with the storm inside him. Alexander held a sealed envelope while watching the boy sleep, exhausted from the tests. The millionaire, used to handling contracts and million-dollar figures, now trembled before a single piece of paper. When Naomi found out about the visit, she was furious, not out of distrust but out of violation. She knew exactly what it meant. He wanted to prove what her love had never needed to justify. When the doctor entered, time seemed to slow. Alexander took the envelope, hesitated, then tore it open. The sound of the paper ripping was like a verdict. The numbers were cold, clear, irrefutable. Genetic compatibility 99.9%. His hands shook. His eyes filled with tears. The millionaire who had built empires now felt small before 3 lives born without his name, yet carrying his face all the same. Back at the ranch, Naomi waited for him on the porch, steady but visibly weary. The distance between them was more than physical. It was made of old wounds and words never spoken. Alexander tried to speak, but she simply said, "I don't need you to prove what's always been true." The words cut through the air like a blade. In that instant, he understood that no amount of money could buy the forgiveness he sought. Some things could only be healed by time and humility. As the sun set, the children played in the yard, unaware of the weight that day carried. Alexander watched from afar, torn between guilt and admiration. Naomi, hands resting on the railing, took a deep breath, trying to hold herself together. The ranch, once a symbol of power and solitude, had become the stage for an unexpected reunion between past and destiny. And deep down, both of them knew the true test was still yet to come. Alexander Reed was not a man who lost control, but that day, guilt made him stumble. The report, the children, Naomi's eyes, it all swirled into a silent storm inside him. For the first time, the millionaire saw the size of the emptiness that success had never managed to fill. He sat on the edge of the bed staring at his hands, the same hands that had built empires and at the same time destroyed what mattered most. Deep down he knew, no amount of money could free him from what was coming. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the ranch earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise when he parked his black car in front of the main house. He carried with him a check, some documents, and the look of a man weighed down by regret. When Naomi opened the door, he hesitated. He tried to offer her help, a better house, private schooling for the children, a comfortable life. But each word fell cold and distant. Naomi watched him in silence, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "I don't want charity, Alexander. I want respect." That sentence hit him like a perfectly aimed blow. For a moment, he saw in her the woman who had always existed behind the former maid. Strong, upright, unbreakable. Naomi didn't need his fortune. She needed to be seen as equal. The simplicity of her words shattered the pride of the millionaire. who had believed he could fix everything with figures. But there were things gold could never buy, and forgiveness was one of them. Naomi went back to work, pretending life was normal. She cleaned the room slowly, but her heart was at war. With every motion of the rag against the floor, she remembered the secret marriage, the stolen days of love, and the moment everything collapsed under lies she hadn't told. Now seeing him again, so near and yet so different, she wondered if time truly had the power to mend what prejudice had destroyed. Alexander spent the day watching her from a distance, as if trying to decipher a book written in another language. There was something in Naomi's posture that disarmed him. Dignity. She asked for nothing, expected nothing. She simply did what she always had, fought quietly. And the millionaire, so accustomed to applause and submission, felt small before the greatness of a simple woman. With every gesture of hers, he saw a reflection of his own failure. But not everyone saw beauty in that scene. Veronica Steele, his fiancée, had found out everything. Headlines began to circulate quietly through the local papers. Texas millionaire hides scandal with former maid. Veronica arrived at the ranch with an icy stare and a sharp tongue. She called Naomi the woman who trapped a man with children. Her words dripped like venom, spreading shame through the air. Naomi, wounded, only lowered her head and stayed silent. Alexander stepped in. He grabbed Veronica's arm, his voice low and firm, but his eyes burning with something new. "That's enough, Veronica. It's over." Her reaction was a mix of fury and disbelief. No one had ever interrupted her in public, least of all a man she believed she owned. But Alexander was no longer the same. His gaze turned to Naomi, and for a brief instant the world fell silent. He knew there was something far greater at stake than reputation. When Veronica left, Naomi remained still, her face marked by pain. Alexander moved closer, but she stepped back. There was an abyss between them, carved by years of pride, hurt, and silence. Still he tried. "I was wrong, Naomi, there's no excuse. But there is a will to make things right." She looked at him with restrained tenderness, her eyes glistening, and replied softly, "Then start by respecting what's left of me." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Alone again, Alexander finally understood that redemption didn't come with numbers, but with actions. He began walking through the fields at sunset, reflecting on all he had lost and what he might still reclaim. The millionaire who once believed gold was power now realized that true wealth lived in the values he had long forgotten. And on the horizon, as the sun dipped behind the grazing horses, a new purpose began to rise within him, one that no fortune could ever buy. The night was lit by crystal chandeliers and rehearsed smiles. The Beverly Hills ballroom pulsed with businessmen, politicians, and celebrities. Alexander Reed, the Texan millionaire, stood at the center of it all. Flawless in his black suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Veronica Steele displayed the calculated charm of someone born to be watched. But behind every glass of champagne there was tension. The sparkle of that party wasn't light. It was the spark of a fire about to ignite the truth. While the guests toasted success, Naomi Carter arrived quietly through the back entrance, hired as a temporary maid for the event. She wore her white uniform, hair pinned back, her expression calm. She had no idea this would become the stage of her humiliation. Between trays and whispers, she moved with the same dignity as always, even in a place where luxury was designed to divide, not unite. Little did she know fate had planned her reappearance before the man she'd tried to forget. Alexander saw her first. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. Naomi, holding a rag and moving discreetly through the golden room, seemed painfully out of place. He rose instinctively, trying to reach her. But Veronica noticed his gaze. Jealousy flashed in her eyes like a sharpened blade. And before he could stop her, she was already planning the cruel spectacle that would turn the night into a public execution. The microphone was handed to Veronica, who smiled like someone savoring poison. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone too sweet to be sincere. "Before we toast, I'd like to introduce someone very special. The woman who, without any title at all, managed to capture a millionaire's heart." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Naomi froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some curious, others cruel. The entire ballroom seemed to spin. Veronica stepped closer, her heels striking the marble like whips. "Say hello to our lovely maid." The words sliced the air like a sentence. Naomi tried to remain composed, but her hands trembled. Her face burned with shame and her eyes filled with tears. Alexander started toward her, but she lifted her chin, refusing to play the victim. Even wounded, she stood tall, unbroken, before an audience that feasted on scandal. The silence shattered under Alexander's deep voice. "Enough, Veronica." His tone left no room for argument. The entire room fell still. The millionaire walked toward Naomi, and for a moment time itself paused. With the calm authority of a man who owed nothing to anyone, he took the microphone from his fiancée's hand and spoke. "She's not just a maid. She's the mother of my children." The murmur that followed was deafening. Cameras rose, phones flashed, every second captured for the world to see. Veronica stood frozen, her face rigid, her eyes hollow with disbelief. Alexander stood beside Naomi, taking her hand, not as a romantic gesture, but as a shield. The ballroom, once golden, now felt cold. The guests who had once smiled now whispered among themselves like vultures circling a fresh story. Naomi, her eyes steady and tears restrained, faced the crowd without stepping back. For the first time, she didn't hide. The hours that followed were chaos. Social media erupted with videos, headlines, and gossip. Texas millionaire reveals secret children. The maid and the triplets scandal. Alexander tried to shield Naomi, but the avalanche had already begun. What was meant to be an act of redemption turned into a public storm. And among flashes and invasive questions, he realized that by defending the truth, he had lost control of his own story. Naomi left the event without a word, her head high, her heart in ruins. Alexander followed her to the parking lot, calling her name. She stopped for a moment but didn't turn around. "Now everyone knows who I am," she said calmly. "But do you know who you are?" The question echoed like thunder in the still night, and as the California wind swept away the glitter of the lights, Alexander understood that public shame was only the beginning of the storm. The storm didn't begin with thunder, it began with cameras. The morning after the scandal, Alexander Reed's ranch was flooded with reporters, drones, and gawkers. The main gate, once a symbol of prestige, had become a shield against sharp questions. The millionaire watched from the porch, eyes heavy. The man who once controlled headlines was now their prisoner, and at the center of it all, Naomi fought to protect what little peace she still had. She tried to keep her routine, waking early, brewing coffee, taking the kids to school. But the flashes followed her like ghosts. The maid who won a millionaire's heart. The headlines echoed everywhere. Her face filled newspapers and screens, distorted, judged, consumed. Naomi had never wanted fame. All she'd ever wished for was quiet, dignity, and the chance to raise her children far from the noise of the world. But the world had decided it wanted her story, whether she liked it or not. While Naomi hid behind closed curtains, Alexander fought a different war. Investors demanded answers, shareholders lost confidence, and Veronica, now his ex-fiancée, poisoned interviews with icy precision. She used him, she said, each word a dagger. The empire Alexander had built on the image of a flawless man began to crumble. The millionaire learned that power offers no protection when truth becomes public. Naomi decided to leave the ranch. Late one night, she packed what little she had and moved with her children into a small room behind a local cafe. There, she worked once again as a maid, wiping tables, sweeping floors, serving strangers, while her children sat quietly in the corner, flipping through worn-out books. There was sadness, yes, but also strength. She would rather live in humble honesty than in luxury stained by shame. Alexander tried to help her. He sent money, clothes, gifts. She refused them all. "What I need, your money can't buy," she told him, looking straight into his eyes. He didn't insist. The distance between them grew, and so did the longing. Alexander missed the laughter of the children, the smell of coffee from the kitchen, the echo of small voices running through the halls. Silence had become his punishment. But fate wasn't finished testing the limits of their hearts. One stormy night, thunder split the Texas sky with a vengeance. Alone in the mansion, Alexander heard the local radio. A house fire reported near the South Road. Then came Naomi's name. His heart stopped for a moment. Without thinking, he grabbed his car keys and raced into the night, the rain pounding against the windshield like guilt itself. The road was nearly invisible, drowned in fog and mud. Each flash of lightning illuminated Alexander's tense face behind the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. When he arrived, Flames were devouring Naomi's small home. The fire roared against the wind, reflected in the terrified eyes of the children outside. Without hesitation, the millionaire ran toward the blaze, ignoring the neighbors' shouts. Rain clashed with fire and the air filled with smoke and chaos. He found her inside, trying to save a box of photos and memories. Naomi coughed, eyes burning, her skin smudged with ash. "Leave it, come on," Alexander shouted, pulling her by the arms. The fire crackled around them, the heat unbearable. She resisted for a moment, reaching for something on the floor, but he lifted her into his arms. They stumbled out through the smoke and rain just as the house collapsed behind them. Outside, the children ran to them, crying. Naomi fell into his arms, coughing, exhausted, but alive. The fire raged on behind them, devouring the last remains of her home and the past she'd tried so hard to bury. Alexander, soaked, injured, breathless, held her tightly. And there, between chaos and relief, the millionaire finally understood what no gold could replace: the chance to start again. The fire was gone, but the smell of smoke clung to Alexander Reed's soul. The hospital was silent except for the rhythmic hum of machines and the distant whisper of rain still falling outside. The millionaire lay in a white bed, his arm bandaged, his face marked by light burns. For the first time in a long while, he looked human, vulnerable, stripped of wealth, stripped of suits and pride. Just a man, exhausted and broken before his own ruins. Naomi Carter watched quietly from the chair beside him, her curly hair loose and messy, hands clasped in her lap. The former maid, now a woman of courage and scars, looked at the man who had once shattered her heart, the same man who had just risked his life for her and their children. Nurses came and went, exchanging discreet glances. No words were spoken, yet her presence said everything. Love still lived there, even if buried beneath ashes. The room smelled of antiseptic and hope. Naomi dampened a cloth and gently wiped his forehead, her movements soft and deliberate, as if touching an old memory. Alexander stirred, eyes blinking open. When he saw her, he smiled, faintly but sincerely, stripped of all masks. "Are you safe?" he whispered. She nodded, and in that instant, time seemed to bend as if the past and present had finally reconciled. The triplets slept in a nearby room, watched over by a nurse. Outside, dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Naomi looked out the window, her heart heavy. The house was gone, the memories too. But something new was being born between pain and gratitude. It wasn't a return to what was lost. It was the beginning of what truly mattered. Alexander, still weak, tried to sit up. Naomi stopped him with a firm hand, but he persisted. "I should have been there. All these years," he murmured, voice trembling with regret. Naomi took a deep breath before answering. "You can't change the past, Alexander, but you can choose what you'll do with what's left." The millionaire looked away, feeling the sting of truth pierce through his guilt. While he rested, Naomi walked to the small table beside the bed. Among the few belongings saved from the fire was a wooden box, its edges charred. She opened it and found old photos, a necklace, and a few half-burned papers. Beneath them, an envelope, scorched but intact, with the name Alexander written in her handwriting. Her hands trembled, her heart raced. That letter had vanished years ago, the same one she had written when she discovered she was pregnant before she was sent away from the Reed mansion. For a moment, the hospital disappeared, and she was back in that night, alone, desperate, pleading to be heard. Now fate had returned what time had stolen. The silence in the room grew heavy, almost sacred. She held the envelope gently, as if holding her destiny itself. Her gaze drifted to Alexander, still asleep, and a lump rose in her throat. It wasn't the right time to read it, but she knew what it contained. Answers, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps pain. The hum of the heart monitor echoed softly, and every beep seemed to whisper that the truth was about to awaken. Outside, the sun began to break over the horizon, reflecting off the hospital windows. Naomi closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The fire had destroyed everything material, yet somehow returned what pride had torn apart. And as the world woke, she understood. Redemption doesn't always come as a miracle. Sometimes it comes as ashes. Sometimes it comes as a letter time forgot to deliver. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, drawing golden lines across the cold floor. Naomi Carter held the envelope as if she were holding fate itself. The aged paper trembled in her hands, its burned edges whispering that time does not forgive. but sometimes it gives back what it once stole. Her heart pounded between fear and curiosity. Deep down, she knew the missing piece of her past was waiting inside that letter. Seated beside the bed, she took a deep breath and began to read. The words written in her hurried handwriting came back like a distant echo. In the letter, she spoke of her pregnancy, her love, and her fear of being rejected for who she was, a maid who fell in love with a millionaire. She wrote that she didn't want charity or recognition, only the chance to raise her children with dignity. The tears came before she even realized. It was like rereading her own soul. She remembered the day she left the letter on Richard Reed's desk, Alexander's father. She recalled his cold gaze, the heavy silence, and the way he promised to deliver it personally. Now she understood the bitter truth. He never did. The man who expelled her from the ranch had also stolen his son's right to know his own children. And in doing so, he had condemned them all to years of loneliness. As Naomi held the paper carefully, Alexander woke up. Still weak, he watched her quietly. Her face revealed something, a mix of pain and revelation. "What's that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Naomi took a moment before answering. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed the letter in his lap. "It's the truth, Alexander. The one your father never wanted you to know." He took the envelope with trembling hands. His name, written in ink, seemed to scream at him. When he began to read, the silence in the room became deafening. Each word struck him like a blow. Every line a reminder of what he'd lost. Every sentence a confession time couldn't erase. The millionaire lowered the letter slowly, his eyes glistening. He knew?" he whispered. Naomi nodded. Alexander's expression shifted. Sadness gave way to fury, not at the woman before him, but at the man who had shaped his life.
"He destroyed everything," he said, voice breaking.
Naomi said nothing. She simply watched him, realizing that the real fire now burned inside him. In that moment, the millionaire wasn't the powerful businessman anymore. He was a wounded son, finally aware of the prison built for him. He stood, wincing from the pain, and walked to the window. The sun was rising over Texas, bathing the sky in copper light. "I spent my life thinking love and weakness were the same thing," he said quietly. "But you proved me wrong." He turned toward her, his expression changed, a much softer, freer. Naomi watched him with a mix of tenderness and fear. She knew that when a man like Alexander Reed decides to change, the world around him begins to shake. Naomi stepped closer, resting her hand gently on his arm. "Don't seek revenge, Alexander. Seek peace." He looked at her with a bitter smile. "Peace?" he repeated. "After everything he did? After everything I lost?" She nodded. "Peace is what separates men from monsters." The words lingered in the air, heavy, almost sacred. And for the first time, the millionaire understood that forgiveness demanded more courage than rage ever could. Outside, the clouds began to part, and the rain finally stopped. Naomi placed the letter back into the box and handed it to him. "Now it's your turn to decide what you'll do with the truth." Alexander stood in silence, staring at the paper that carried the weight of an entire lifetime. And there, between pain and regret, he made a decision, one that would change everything. Because some truths don't just set you free, they demand action. The following days were chaos. News of the letter leaked. No one knew how, but suddenly the past of Alexander Reed and Naomi Carter was splashed across every headline once again. Tabloids screamed about the millionaire deceived by his ex-maid, and the scandal reignited like fire feeding on wind. Alexander, once a man who could control the world with a single phone call, now watched his own name become entertainment. Naomi once more felt the heavy weight of public judgment. Social media turned into a merciless courtroom. People commented without compassion, inventing stories that never happened. She used him from the start. He's just another rich man playing God. Words that cut deeper than any wound. Naomi avoided leaving the house. The children, confused, asked why their classmates laughed at them. Alexander tried to protect them, but money was a useless shield against the poison of public opinion. Pressure mounted inside Reed Industries. Board members called for emergency meetings and investors threatened to pull out. "You need to distance yourself from her," one advised coldly. But Alexander simply stood up and left the room. For the first time, profit didn't dictate his choices and love did. Yet even he knew that love in a cynical world came with a price. Meanwhile, Naomi packed her bags in silence. She no longer had the strength to fight the invisible. "I don't want to be the reason for your downfall," she said over the phone. "You've already lost too much because of me." Her voice trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. Alexander tried to stop her, but she remained firm. "I have to protect my children. They deserve peace, even if that means disappearing." That night, the Texas sky was covered in thick clouds. Naomi led the triplets to the train station. The wind was cold, slicing across her face, and every step felt like a farewell. The children clutched small toys, unaware of the weight of the moment. Naomi checked the clock, forcing herself to stay calm. The approaching train's whistle sounded more like a sentence than salvation. Alexander arrived just before departure. His suit jacket was gone, hair disheveled, eyes frantic. When he saw her, he ran. Naomi turned in shock. He stopped in front of her, breathless, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Don't go," he pleaded, voice cracking. "Not as your boss, not as a millionaire, but as a father." His words echoed across the platform, mingling with the wind and the grinding of metal. Naomi stared at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "You say that now, Alexander, but the world will never leave us in peace." He stepped closer, then let the world wait. The moment froze. The train behind them, steam rising, the sound of rain and iron blending together. People on the platform watched silently, some in awe, some in tears. It felt as if love itself, wounded and raw, had decided to defy gravity. The children looked at their father, uncertain, but instinct spoke louder than confusion. Chloe called him Daddy for the first time, and the word tore through the noise like a burst of sunlight. Alexander dropped to his knees, pulling all three of them into his arms, tears mixing with the rain. Naomi watched, torn between fear and hope. She knew this man was no longer the same. The fire had changed him. When the train finally departed without them, Naomi stood still. Then she turned to Alexander and said softly, "If you want me to stay, prove that your love is worth more than your money." He nodded slowly, saying nothing, but his eyes promised everything. As the wind tossed her hair and the lights of the station flickered behind them, the millionaire understood. This was his true breaking point. Not of pain, but of courage. The courage to begin again. Naomi Carter chose to stay, but not to live a fairy tale. Her return to the ranch was quiet, without glamour or flashing cameras. The walls of the house, once cold and distant, now bore witness to something deeper, the attempt to rebuild. Alexander Reed, the millionaire, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yet there was a new light in his eyes, the light of purpose. After all, love needed proof, not promises. Life on the ranch slowly found its rhythm again. Naomi woke up early, made breakfast, and then went to work. Yes, she still cleaned the offices, not out of submission, but choice. "I want to remember where I came from," she'd say. There was strength in her hands, pride in every gesture. Alexander, who once saw the maid as a shadow from his past, now saw her as the heartbeat of the ranch, the axis that kept everything standing. While she worked, he fought battles beyond the gates. Veronica Steele, his ex-fiancée, wielded the media like a weapon. She accused him of betrayal, of madness, of being bewitched by a woman beneath his class. The scandal filled headlines, and investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. The Reed empire began to crumble, yet Alexander remained unshaken. "Let them go," he'd say. "You can't build love with people who only understand profit." Naomi watched from a distance. She knew that real love wasn't made of grand gestures, but of constancy. During work break, she'd bring him coffee or leave small handwritten notes on his desk with words of encouragement. "You're not alone." Simple gestures, yet powerful enough to change the tone of a day. At night, she sat with the children at the table, their laughter serving as a quiet reminder that despite everything, life insisted on blooming. Alexander, however, lived through days of trial. Lawyers, advisors, and shareholders urged him to cut ties with Naomi. "Her name is a stain," they said. He'd look out the office window, watching from afar the woman sweeping the floors with dignity. "Funny," he murmured. "The only clean person in this mess is the one they call the maid." The words stayed with him like a revelation. Over time, something inside him began to shift. The mornings that used to be filled with meetings and numbers now had silent pauses. Moments where he simply watched Naomi talking to the staff, smiling at the children, or humming softly as she cleaned. That was peace. A peace that a millionaire surrounded by power all his life had never known. Her simplicity healed him quietly, asking for nothing in return. But the outside world does not forgive redemption. One day Alexander received a subpoena. Veronica was suing him for defamation and breach of contract. The headline read, "The millionaire who traded high society for a maid." He chuckled softly, weary but sincere. "They think they're humiliating me," he said. "They don't realize it's the truest title I've ever had." Naomi heard him and smiled quietly. The public trial was inevitable, not in a marble courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Alexander lost contracts but gained respect from those who truly knew him. Employees began to believe in him again, inspired by his transformation. Naomi, though still the target of stares and whispers, walked with her head held high. Their love, quiet and authentic, was beginning to change what money never could. Trust. One night, while everyone slept, Naomi entered Alexander's office. He was sitting there, exhausted, papers scattered across the desk. "You're going to win this," she said, firm and calm. He looked up and smiled. "With you by my side, I can't lose." The words hung in the air, light as a promise. And in that moment, Naomi understood. Yes, love was on trial, but this time it was life itself that was the judge. And together they were ready to defend their case. The night was heavy, wrapped in silence and tension. Naomi Carter was awakened by a sound, a muffled cry coming from the children's room. When she turned on the light, she saw little Caleb, pale, sweating and struggling to breathe. Panic rose in her throat like a cold wave. Within seconds, a mother's instinct took over. She scooped him into her arms and ran to the car, barefoot, her heart pounding louder than the storm outside. Alexander Reed, the millionaire, heard the engine start and bolted down the stairs. Still in his suit, exhaustion etched into his face, he jumped into the car without thinking twice. "Drive faster, please," Naomi cried through tears. The road to the hospital felt endless, every red light an invisible enemy. Alexander glanced into the rearview mirror, watching Naomi cradle their son, whispering prayers that sounded like they belonged to another lifetime. At the hospital, time lost all meaning. Doctors rushed in and out, tests were taken, and waiting became its own form of torture. Naomi stood by the wall, hands clasped, eyes red and swollen. "He'll be okay," she murmured again and again like a mantra. Alexander paced the corridor, powerless. The millionaire who once controlled companies, markets, and men now stood helpless before a 5-year-old's fragile heartbeat. For the first time, power meant nothing. When the doctor appeared, the world seemed to stop. "We need to wait for the body's response," he said, voice measured, distant. Naomi collapsed to her knees and Alexander caught her before she hit the floor. "I should have been here sooner," he whispered, broken. Naomi met his eyes, and there was pain, yes, but also forgiveness. "It's not about what you should have done, Alexander. It's about what you can still do." Her words fell like healing rain. The next few hours became a test of faith. Naomi sat by the bed, holding Caleb's small hand, praying silently. The hospital's cold light reflected off her tears as they slid down her cheeks. Alexander watched her in awe. The man who once prided himself on needing no one now found salvation in a simple prayer. The maid and the millionaire, two souls side by side, bound not by luck but by faith. Suddenly, the heart monitor beeped sharply. Naomi froze, her breath caught. The boy stirred, weak but alive. Alexander's eyes filled with tears, and a choked laugh escaped him. "He's back," he whispered. Naomi pressed her forehead to his, both crying as the steady rhythm of machines filled the room. Sometimes faith is just that, holding on when everything else falls apart. Days later, the hospital grew quieter. Caleb was smiling again, and Naomi was resting for the first time in days. Alexander sat nearby, watching her. Something new was growing inside him, something no amount of money could buy. He leaned closer and said softly, "I used to think being a millionaire was about power, but it's about purpose, and mine is here." Naomi looked at him, surprised, and smiled gently. That night, under the soft light of the hospital room, Alexander knelt before her. There were no flowers, no speeches, just a man stripped of guilt and pride. "Naomi Carter," he said quietly, "I lost you once because of pride. I won't lose you again because of silence." From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold ring. No diamond, no luxury. "Marry me, not as your boss, as a man." Naomi looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Time seemed to stop again, but this time it was peaceful, full of grace. She took his hand and nodded slowly, a smile breaking through the tears. "Yes," she said, "but promise me one thing, never forget where you came from." He smiled back, eyes shining. "I promise. And that's exactly where I want to return. Home to you." And in that quiet promise, their love, once broken, finally began to heal. Months had passed since that night in the hospital. The sun rose softer over the Reed Ranch and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. Naomi Carter walked slowly through the fields, watching the children run through the damp grass. Life had finally found its rhythm again. Alexander Reed, the millionaire, no longer wore expensive suits or carried the air of superiority that once defined him. Now he wore boots, a linen shirt, and a calm smile, the kind of smile that comes from knowing that true wealth is having a home. The ranch, once a symbol of power, had become a symbol of renewal. Naomi now ran a foundation for working mothers, helping women who, like her, had faced the weight of inequality and loneliness. The walls of the old Reed house now echoed with laughter, stories, and hope. The name Home of the Heart was painted at the entrance, the letters hand-drawn by her and the children. Somehow that simple act represented everything they had built together. Alexander approached Naomi carrying a basket of fruit freshly picked from the orchard. "Remember when I thought value was only about numbers?" he said with a small smile. "I think I finally found the only investment that truly matters." She laughed, that soft laugh that always disarmed him. "And what's that?" she teased. "You," he answered without hesitation. The former maid blushed, shaking her head. "I'm no investment, Alexander. I'm your partner." And in that moment he knew she was right. The afternoons on the ranch were something out of a painting. The sunset cast golden light over the fences and the children's laughter blended with the song of birds. Sometimes Naomi would stop to watch from afar. Alexander's tall figure guiding the triplets, helping them plant small seedlings in the garden. That simple, everyday scene was worth more than any fortune. The millionaire who once lost everything had finally found what money could never buy: belonging. One evening, they set up a dinner outdoors. The tables were arranged beneath the old oak tree, lit by hanging lights and handmade candles. Marjorie Lane, the family's former cook, served the dishes with a proud smile. "I've never seen this ranch so full of life," she said. Naomi looked around, her throat tightening. It was true. Love filled every corner, every detail, every trace of what they had overcome. During the dinner, Alexander stood to speak. There was no glamorous audience, only friends, workers, and their children. "I've learned that a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in what he's willing to give," he said. "And Naomi taught me that love and dignity walk hand in hand." The applause that followed was small but heartfelt. Naomi smiled, gently holding his hand beneath the table. When the celebration ended, the light still flickered across the field. Naomi and Alexander walked toward the porch. The sky was painted with stars and the air smelled of wet earth. "Do you remember when everything was just silence and pain?" she asked. "I do," he replied softly. "And it was in that silence that I learned to listen to what truly matters." She rested her head on his shoulder, and the world seemed perfectly aligned. The triplets soon appeared, sleepy and seeking their goodnight kisses. Naomi laughed, kneeling to hug them. Alexander joined in, and together the four of them walked back inside. In the hallway, a recent photograph hung on the wall, the couple and their children smiling in front of a field of sunflowers. The image seemed to capture not just a moment but a promise, that true love is the only home no one can take away. Before sleep, Alexander took Naomi's hand and said quietly, "You were my maid, Naomi, but you've always been the owner of my heart." She smiled, tears glistening, and kissed him gently. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the sound of crickets formed a soothing melody. The millionaire closed his eyes and, for the first time, slept in peace, not in a mansion, but at home. What Naomi and Alexander's story teaches us is that true wealth isn't found in mansions, it's in the emotions that make a home. The millionaire and the maid prove that love is the only investment that never loses value, because it grows through loss, blossoms through forgiveness, and lives forever in the heart. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. No one is too small to deserve love, nor too great to learn it. So tell me, how many times has pride kept you from what really matters? If this story touched your heart, then you already know you're in the right place. Here we talk about love, resilience, purpose, and new beginnings. Everything that truly transforms lives. So go ahead, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and stay with us on this journey, because the next story could be yours, and your new beginning can start today.